What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight,
Oh, sorry about that, Johnny.
no problem. Technical difficulties to start off. We haven't had a live stream together, Randy, for like a few weeks here, so no problems there. What's
A little
up, y'all?
rusty still.
Got to get back in the groove of the live stream game. So, guys, really excited to see y'all tonight. Randy and I are going to be breaking down the top crankbait mistakes that new anglers make in the fall. And maybe not just new anglers, but anglers in general. Fall is a great time to throw a crankbait, both offshore and shallow, and we're going to be covering both aspects today. I'm going to be talking about the deep diving crankbaits in the fall, and Randy's going to be talking about the shallow diving crankbaits in the fall. So, should be a great stream. Randy, how's it going tonight?
Doing good, Johnny. And like I said, this is going to be good with the crankbaits as far as the mistakes, because I've made a lot of mistakes with crankbaits over the years. I can share my mistakes with everybody so you guys don't have to go through them, and it's probably going to save you a lot of frustration on there.
Oh, for sure. I've been in the same boat, and honestly, fall fishing was really tough for me for a long time because I didn't understand the bass movement, I didn't understand the right bait selection, things like that. And so we're going to get into a lot of that in today's stream and help you kind of get off on the right foot to fall fishing, because while it can be a great time to catch fish, it can also be a really tough time to catch fish. So real quick, we got to say hi to everyone on the stream. Got Jess, Chad, Seymour, Timo, Ryan, Tommy, Bill. How's everyone doing tonight? PK. Got the normal crew in here. How's it going? JW Coop. And got Frank in here as well. So good to see everyone on the stream tonight. So Randy, before we get into it, a couple things I want to call out. First, thanks everyone who was at who watched the live stream number 100. If you haven't checked it out, I actually did an on the water live stream that was live on the lake. It was very scary, Randy, because I literally went out in the lake. I hadn't been to that lake in 6 months, and I really had never fished that lake in that time of the year. And I was just basically going out in 2 hours trying to find and catch fish live. I didn't have any fish found. I literally just went out there, turned the cameras on, and was like, hopefully it works out. I caught fish there in the past, so I was pretty confident. But when I got there, the water clarity was like 2 feet less than what I thought it was. Normally it has like 3 foot of visibility on this lake, nice and clear. It had like 1.5 feet visibility. And so I was already like freaked out when we turned the live stream on. I didn't really show it on the stream, but I was like, oh God, am I going to catch a fish? Because like I had to completely adjust my whole game plan. Worked out within an hour. I put 3 nice fish in the boat. Pretty good deal, but that was a kind of a nerve-wracking experience finding fish live.
I'm still waiting for the first time that you don't catch them. I mean, Johnny and I have been doing this together for a long time. You know, going on, what is it, almost 2 years now?
Yeah, pretty close to 2 years.
And I have never seen him not catch them. So it's like, is it ever going to happen? So we'll find out.
Well, one of these days it's bound to happen. So we'll make sure that we at least do a few more of those live streams. I'm actually thinking about doing something, guys, where because the views and stuff on those live streams just aren't that big, I might be doing something on fishthemoment.com with those, where we actually go out and do like a nighttime live stream, morning live stream, stuff like that over on the website. I'll put more information out about that, but there are more live streams on the water coming to you guys. And we'll probably get out with Randy as well, too, if we can get Randy to go out there one night, and I'll film him, and we'll break down all Randy's stuff live. Show him finding some fish, too. I think that'll be fun.
Yeah. Hey, we'll definitely. I've noticed in several comments that they want some info on cranking smallmouth. I got a real good smallmouth cranking tip I'll share with you guys later in the stream here, so we'll definitely hit on that for a little bit.
Awesome. Good deal right there. That's fan service right there, Randy. Leave comments down in the stream if you want questions answered, because we are watching. Randy and I are checking it out, so definitely leave some comments in the live chat if you want us to answer some questions about crankbait fishing while we're going through the entire stream. And so before we get into our top 5 mistakes, one thing I do want to call out is that we have a giveaway today, again, for Bridgeford Beef Jerky. Bridgeford is the title sponsor for the Fish Moment live stream and the podcast. Our only sponsor. We've had almost 100 live streams, and there are one and super dedicated sponsors, so huge shout out to Bridgeford. We get so many messages, guys, from guys who try Bridgeford because of this podcast, and they absolutely love it. I'm still addicted to it. It was so funny, Randy, because during that live stream, my wife was doing the recording, and I was doing a giveaway for beef jerky, and we didn't bring any snacks in the boat. And we did this Bridgeford giveaway during the live on the water stream, like 30 minutes in, and it was so hard for me to stop her from just eating the entire bag. So like 5 minutes after the beef jerky was given away, that beef jerky was gone, like completely gone.
Man.
So it's really good stuff, guys. And if you guys want to have a chance to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky, hang around until about halfway through the podcast, and we'll let you guys know how you can enter into that, and then you'll get a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky. So anyway, huge shout out there. Good deal. A couple comments here coming across. People said they really like that live stream. And a couple other questions here from Billy. What do you think the keys are to catching fish with the electronics? Is it why do I catch fish consistently? That's one question we got here. And I think honestly, guys, the reason that I'm able to catch fish consistently is my ability to use my electronics. That's something that's really helpful for me, but it's also understanding bass behavior in relation to electronics. So the way I think about electronics is it's a tool to give me more information about what's going on in the world. It's kind of like I used to work for suppliers for Walmart, like corporate, the big company, and most like mom and pop shops, the way I think about it, maybe they might have people walk in, they buy a couple things off the store, they then restock the store when it's running low. And that's how they run their business. And that's kind of how I feel like a lot of fishermen do it. They just kind of catch a fish. If they catch a fish off a log, they go fish another log, so on and so forth. And they just kind of go through the motions. Where Walmart, this big corporation, they use data analytics. They get as much information as possible. They survey their customers. They take all the data from all their stores and use it to predict what's going to happen in the future. And that's what I'm using with my electronics for. It's to give me more data and more information to make predictive guesses about where the fish are going to be. And I just feel like the more information you can get, whether it's from electronics, whether it's looking at the bank, looking at the water visibility, all those things are important. Like, for example, when I was out in the lake the other day, Randy, on that live stream, I saw the water visibility was not 3 foot of visibility like I expected, it was a foot of visibility. Immediately then I knew that I wasn't going to be able to fish deeper than about 10 foot of water offshore. I then used my electronics to verify that by seeing that the thermocline was in 10 foot of water. So I didn't necessarily need the electronics to know I needed to fish shallower. I could just use my environmental awareness to do that, but having both at the same time is very helpful. So it's just about getting as much information as possible and then knowing what to do with it. So it's more complicated, I guess, than just being good with electronics, but that's definitely helpful. What do you think, Randy?
Hey, by the way, we're talking. I just wanted to address the fact that everybody thinks I don't fish over 2 feet deep. I did a show last week on my YouTube channel where I was catching them at Table Rock Lake, 70 feet of water, suspended 30 foot down with a drop shot, seeing the bass on my electronics. So I just wanted to throw that out there a little bit.
Hey, there we go. And actually, I'm doing the challenges next week where I'm going to go fish up shallow, which is going to be a disaster, but I am going to show you guys that.
I can't imagine how many fish there must have been down there. I mean, if you could have graphed over, you'd probably caught 50 times more than I did, though, on it.
Well, hey, that's what we do here, too. We like to give both perspectives. But we do need to do a challenge, Randy, where you fish exclusively offshore and I fish exclusively up shallow. I think that would be a fun show.
Yep, no doubt.
Awesome. Good deal. So let's jump into some of these topics. So first, crankbait mistake that anglers make in the fall. And this is specific to fall bass fishing. One of the mistakes we're going to talk about is just equipment in general, because we get a ton of questions about that. There's one thing I actually do want to address, and it's why I use monofilament line exclusively when throwing a crankbait. A lot of people do not understand that, but I'll explain that near the in one of these points in the stream. But again, all these mistakes are related to fall bass fishing. So basically from now through like maybe mid-November, early November, that's kind of the fall period we're talking about. Water temperatures start to fall into the low 80s, high 70s, even in the 60s. That's your fall bass fishing. So first thing that we identified as a mistake that anglers make during the fall with crankbaits is the speed of retrieve versus the water temperature. A lot of guys, I feel like, are using the wrong retrieve speed in the fall based on the water temperature they're seeing, and in addition to that, also sometimes the water clarity they're seeing. So, Randy, do you want to kind of start off on that topic and explain up shallow some of those mistakes that guys make with speed of retrieve?
Yeah, for shallow cranking, and we're talking, when I talk shallow cranking, we're going to be talking about like square bills and maybe like the 200 series bandits, those type of crankbaits that run under 5 feet. maybe even a lipless crankbait, because a lipless crankbait's a great fall time bait. And a lot of this has to do not only with the water clarity that you're fishing and the water temperature, but has to do with the type of cover that you're fishing, how deep of water that you're fishing, and what the targets are actually like, and the time of fall. Because what you have is the fall transition. It's a slow process, yet at times it can speed up. For example, I consider fall sort of like September, sort of like the start of fall, and September is basically like a late summer period. You still have the bass in those late summer patterns, and they're still, relating and biting sort of like they do in the summertime. But what happens is you get into October, particularly like mid to late October. A lot of times you can get one of those really bad cold fronts where the air temperature drops down below freezing for the first time. The water temperatures drop, really quick in that shallow water, and then there's some other changes there. But the thing that I found, guys, is that when I'm shallow cranking, and when I'm talking about shallow cranking, I'm talking about less than 4 or 5 foot of water and more like 2 to 4 foot of water. Most of the time in the fall time of the year, I'm using a medium fast, hard stop and go retrieve. And for me, it's like the key to generating strikes in shallow water in the fall time of the year, when those bass are starting to move in that water, is you've got to use that hard stop and go. And a lot of people use the stop and go retrieve with the crankbait, but I'm talking about where you're cranking it out there and you stop it quick and then you start it up quick, and you do that all the way through the retrieve. Once your bait hits that maximum depth, I don't care if it's 2 feet or 5 feet, that's when I'll crank it 3 or 4 feet and stop and go. And that really erratic retrieve is, to me, one of the big keys, specifically in the early fall, when that water temperature is still, in 75 degrees plus, that type of a thing. Also, that is really key if that water visibility and if the water visibility is under like 2 feet, and the water depth is fairly shallow, and you're fishing around some type of isolated target, whether it be a dock piling, a stump, a laydown, it could be a grass edge, something like that. So that's the first thing, is I'm looking for that hard stop and go, medium fast retrieve. Now, one of the things I found as the fall goes in to October and you start seeing a gradual, consistent decline in the water temperature, and this usually takes place the first part of October, to me, that is when I go to more of a retrieve, as far as more of a straight retrieve. And one of the things that I'm looking for in that time of year is a wind generated bite. A lot of times in the mid part of October, I don't have to stay in that dirty water. I can start getting in a little bit of cleaner water. And I found that just more of a straight, medium type retrieve without the stop and go generates a lot more bites. And then, of course, as it gets later into the fall, if those water temperatures get down, into the 50s, that's when I'm slowing it down even more, again, in relationship to the water clarity.
Good deal. One thing Randy said there, which is just an absolute gem, is that fast stop and go retrieve. And that's what I'm going to talk about as well, Randy. Kind of stole my thunder there. My secret for fall cranking there is that stop and go retrieve. And let me kind of explain why that works so well, both shallow and offshore. I'm going to pull up a screen here just of some Navionics over on Grand Lake. We use Grand Lake just because it's a really nice lake that has mixture of water visibilities, and it sets up like a lot of lakes around the country. If your lake doesn't look exactly like Grand Lake, apologize, but this is just going to give us a good example of what's going on. So basically what happens in the fall, guys, just in general, as many of you know, the shad start to migrate back in the backs of the creeks. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons why. There's a lot of biological reasons and lake condition reasons why the baitfish move back into the creeks. But while the baitfish move back into the creeks, the bass begin to follow them. What this usually means is that you're going to have a lot of baitfish, shad, gizzard shad, blueback herring, whatever type of baitfish you have in your lake, condensed in a very small area. Normally in the summertime, you're going to have your shad on the main lake sections where there's a lot more water and those baitfish can spread apart. But as they get into the backs of these creeks, they get grouped up a lot tighter in these schools. What happens then is that when they pull up to feed on an offshore point or a shallow bank, a chunk rock bank, whatever it is, a lot of shad will push up against that bank all at once, and the bass will be there to eat them. The problem is that there's a bunch of shad, and there's also a lot of bass, but to trick those bass into biting, you have to differentiate your bait from all the shad in the area. And what will happen is that if you're just cranking a point like this that has a bunch of bass, a bunch of shad, and you're using a standard straight retrieve, that bait will blend into all those other bait fish, and the bass won't be able to differentiate it from all the other bait fish in the area. So what I like to do is I like to do that hard stop and go retrieve like Randy's talking about. Burn it really fast, then stop it and let it float up for just maybe half a second, 1 second, then burn it again. And honestly, sometimes I don't even need the bait to be making contact with the bottom. Sometimes my crankbaits are not even hitting the bottom when I'm fishing offshore. And the deal is basically I'm taking a crankbait like a Strike King Series 5 or whatever it is, reeling that thing down, getting it close to the bottom, stopping it, letting it float up, and then it burns across the bottom faster, whether it hits the bottom or not. And that erratic action will get those bass to notice the bait among all the other shad and get them to eat it. So that stop and go retrieve is really important with your baits in especially the early fall, but really any time in the fall when there's a lot of bait fish around. When there's bait fish all over the graph, there's bait fish all over the shorelines, that stop and go fast retrieve will trigger a lot of bites. Now, as Randy mentioned, as it gets later into the year and the bass get a little bit more set into their fall patterns, a lot of those bait fish are going to make their way all the way to the backs of the creeks. And this is where you can start using more of a straight retrieve because these bait fish are going to start breaking off into the creek arms. In the early fall, all the bait fish are going to be stacked up in these creek mouths. But as the fall continues, they're going to start moving and dispersing among the creek arms and spreading out, making it a little bit easier to just kind of pick them off with a standard retrieve. Another thing that I like to do as well, though, is I really, in the fall, like to get into some of these steeper channel swing banks or some of these channel swing points like this and take a deeper diving crankbait and actually just bounce it off those rocks really slow and crawl it through those rocks. And what I'm basically trying to do, this is really when the water temperature is getting to like the 60 degree range, is I fire that crankbait out and I reel it like pretty hard, pretty fast until I make bottom contact, and I'll slowly just reel that thing in super slow. And the reason I'm doing that is because when that water temperature hits like 65 degrees down to like 55 degrees, the crawfish start really coming out on these rocky lakes. Now I'll throw a bait like a Megabass Deep X 200 in like a crawfish pattern and just reel it down there in 8 to 12 foot of water and just like barely tick those rocks and keep it in that strike zone for a longer period of time. And a lot of those fish that are feeding on crawfish will eat this crankbait just as well as they will a jig this time of year. And I can cover a lot more water with a crankbait versus a jig, but I'm still fishing it relatively slow. So really my two retrieves in the fall are I'm either going to be slow cranking a crawdad crankbait when the water temperatures are colder, offshore obviously, and then when I'm fishing offshore earlier in the year when the water temperatures are above 65 degrees, you're speed cranking and then stopping that medium diving crankbait. Any comments on that, Randy?
Yeah, one thing I forgot to add on there that I like to do sometimes is depending upon the crankbait that I'm using, sometimes I like when I'm stop and going it, I'll stop and go, stop and go, stop and go, and then I'll take it and I'll pull it a little bit while I'm reeling. And that when you pull it, it gives it sort of a little bit different action than if you're just straight reeling it. And also if you're hitting cover, like if you're hitting rocks or something like that, if you pull it, a lot of times you can feel it across there. And I really like to do this on the tighter wobbling crankbaits, like my flat side crankbaits. One of my favorite fall crankbaits to use is that Megabass Flap Slap, which is the flat sided ones. And that's one of the type of bait I really like to pull. So that's another retrieve that you can incorporate too in your fall cranking.
Nice. That's a good deal right there. Awesome. Let's see here. Frank says that one of his ways he likes to fish it there, Randy, similar to that, he'll sweep his rod, pull it like you talked about, then give it a couple twitches. So he's kind of like doing a pull into the crankbait, then twitching it, almost like you fish a jerkbait in the wintertime on those deep diving jerkbaits. That's an interesting retrieve too. I think that could work really well, especially as that water temperature cools off for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Good deal. One question here before we move to the next mistake, and that's from Jess. She asks basically, if you're only catching dinks, smaller fish, do you, one, change baits. 2, continue to throw and hope to get bigger fish. Or 3, keep throwing the bait and change location. Well, in my opinion, with that, Jess, there's a couple of things. Well, I would take option 4, which is not listed there. And first thing I do is if I'm catching a lot of little fish, I'm actually going to change the bait I'm fishing and stay in that exact same area, but I'm going to go bigger with my bait. So not only am I just going to change bait, but I'm going to change it up to a bigger bait or a smaller bait or size of the bait, and also fish it in a different way. So it's not just changing your bait, but I'm going to change a bait, change the size of it, but also change the column of the water that it's targeting. If I'm catching a lot of smaller fish that are sitting on the bottom with like a jig or a worm or whatever it is, I will then pick up a swim bait or a flutter spoon or something that works halfway in the middle of the water column, a hair jig, something like that. Because a lot of times what you'll find is that the one size bass will be in one section of the water column. Either the smaller bass are on the bottom and the bigger bass are suspended, or vice versa. Sometimes those bigger bass are on the bottom and the smaller bass are suspended. So you need to also not just worry about changing your bait, but changing the section of the water column you're targeting. And then if you do that, you change your bait and then you change your bait to target different sections of the water column, and that doesn't work, then I just change areas and keep moving on. If I catch like 4 or 5 really small fish in a row, I'm probably just going to try a couple different baits, different parts of the water column for 5 minutes, and move to the next spot. What are your thoughts, Randy?
That's the same with shallow water. In fact, yesterday is a prime example. I had an on-the-water lesson and actually did a video on my YouTube channel today with it, and I was fishing the Megabass Z-Crank, and we just caught a ton of small ones, just like your guys were talking about in this question here. And the client I was fishing with, he asked me, well, what would you do to catch bigger ones? And I told him, well, if I was in a tournament, I would be throwing, like Johnny said, a bigger crankbait, like a 3-inch square bill, some type of a much larger crankbait, or a deeper diving crankbait that reached, instead of like the 2 to 3 feet I was fishing, one that would work in that 4 to 6 foot range. So the same, what Johnny said for offshore fishing is the same in shallow water fishing. Upsize your bait, try different depths, and also adjust your color, because a lot of times you can get a lot of bites on a more subtle color like a shad pattern. You don't get as many bites on a bright, loud chartreuse perch type pattern, but a lot of times that will generate a bigger bite.
Good deal. Yeah, I completely agree. Awesome. So next mistake that anglers make here, and this is again specific to the fall. So the second mistake that we see a lot of guys use is they're using the wrong crankbait size in the fall. Now I find this is a lot more important offshore, I guess, than shallow, and I'll kind of explain that. But I'll kind of start with this one actually, Randy, because this is kind of one of the mistakes that I wanted to put on here. I find that with the size of the crankbait in the fall, it's very important, if you're going to try to maximize the number of bites you get, to fish a crankbait that is as close to the size of the shad or the forage that the bigger bass are feeding on. What does that mean? Well, basically, when you're in the fall situation, a lot of times on lakes, you're going to have multiple bait fish sizes. You're going to have your smaller threadfin shad, maybe your bigger gizzard shad. You're going to have maybe some of the smaller perch or bluegill. Maybe some of the perch and bluegill are bigger. Whatever that is. And in general, when you get on these lakes anywhere in the country, the bigger bass are going to be focused on one type of forage. On Grand Lake, for example, in the fall, they're really focused on big gizzard shad. Wherever those big gizzard shad are, that's where your bigger bass are going to be. Now, if you're just going out to catch a lot of fish, maybe you want to target the bass that are feeding on the smaller threadfin shad, the shad that aren't as big, but usually you're going to find more numbers of bass there. So I kind of use my bait selection to determine the size of the fish I'm going to catch based on the size of the forage the bass are feeding on. And what I find is that if I go to a bigger crankbait, let's say a Strike King Series 5 crankbait here, this can actually imitate a variety of shad, but usually it imitates the gizzard shad better. This is a 3 to 4 inch bait, has a pretty big profile, a pretty wide wobble. If I'm finding that the bass are feeding on a crankbait in the fall offshore, and they're feeding on bigger gizzard shad, I'm going to go to a bait like a Strike King Series 5. I might even go to like a big crankbait, a Strike King 8.0, like a Magnum Square Bill, a really big one. Something like that that's going to really match the size of those bait fish. And I might not get nearly as many bites on this bait. I might throw this bait all day and get 4 to 6 bites, but the 4 to 6 bites I'm going to get are going to be the really big fish. And that's the size bait I'm going to choose to throw because I'm going after those bigger fish. Versus, let's say that I wanted to target numbers of fish. If I was going after numbers of fish, a lot of times you'll find that in the fall, there's a ton of newly hatched gizzard shad or threadfin shad that are small. They're only an inch or two long. And this is where a lot of your 1.5 to 2.5 pound bass are going to be feeding on, those type of shad. That's when I will go to a smaller crankbait. This is a Strike King Series 3 crankbait. It's really, really tiny. It is basically about half the size of that Strike King Series 5, but it still dives in that 8 to 9 foot range. And in general, when I'm fishing deep diving crankbaits in the fall, I'm not actually fishing that deep. We'll talk about that here in a second, but I'm usually going with baits that dive between 6 to 12 feet deep at the deepest. And I kind of go with these really small crankbaits because when those bass are keyed in on shad, you want a bait that matches the size of that forage as much as possible, as close to it as possible. Now, I'm still going to be using that stop and go retrieve, burning it, stopping it, burning it, stopping it to get bites. But because those bass in the fall are so shad focused, if you throw a bigger Strike King Series 5 crankbait, when those bass are feeding on the small shad, you're going to get 1/10 of the bites that you would get on the little crankbait. Vice versa, if those bass are feeding on really big gizzard shad, or you find a spot where the bigger fish are feeding on the big gizzard shad, throwing this little tiny crankbait is not going to entice those bass. It's not going to get their attention, so you need to go to the little bit bigger bait to get those fish to actually eat. By the way, Randy, this is an original Strike King Sexy Shad. This is the first production model. These are like my treasures right here. This is back in 2006 when KVD was dominating with this bait. This is like one of the first ever Strike King Sexy Shad crankbaits. I was sponsored by Strike King at the time. I got these this is like one of the first production runs ever of Strike King Sexy Shad ever.
Oh man!
So that's a pretty cool. That's like a collectible right there.
Yeah, definitely.
But anyways, that's the deal right there. Would you agree with that, Randy, or how would you kind of go about that?
Yeah, I think as far as in terms of size on shallow water, I think a lot of it the first thing you have to determine is what's your expectation. If you're wanting to just catch numbers of fish and trying to get a limit in the boat, obviously you're going to have a lot better chance downsizing and using a small crankbait in shallow water. When I'm talking about a small crankbait, I'm talking about something like a Bandit 200 or that Mega Bass 1.5 S crank, the Z crank, some type of a small crankbait. And what you're going to do is if you want to, generate a bigger bite, obviously you need to go to a bigger size, not only lengthwise, but also the width of it too, because some crankbaits, some are wider than others, fatter than others. Some of them displace a little bit more water. Some of them, push more water, wobble harder. So from that standpoint, I'm first going to determine out what my expectations are. If you use a small crankbait and you're getting a lot of bites on it, it's hard to put it down because the problem you have with that is your odds when you catch a big fish on a small crankbait, it's a random occurrence. Most of your fish are going to run smaller, whereas if you go to a larger crankbait, you're going to sacrifice a tremendous amount of bites, but your overall quality is going to go up. Yeah. Also, another factor I consider in when I decide my crankbait size in shallow water is how aggressive and what the mood and the personality of the bass is at the time I'm there. And to me, one of the biggest factors in determining what that is how much fishing pressure the area's got. For example, if I go down, say if I'm fishing wherever, Grand Lake, Stockton, whatever around here, and it's a Wednesday and there hasn't been many people on the lake, I'm going to start out with a larger crankbait size right off the bat because those fish, they're not as shy. They're a lot more apt to hit a bigger crankbait right off the bat. But if I'm fishing like on a weekend and there's a lot of boats fishing in the area, that's when I'm going to downsize my crankbait size. So you got to judge what your expectations are, take in consideration the fishing pressure, how much, the personality of the fish, how aggressive they are. Another factor in there that plays a big role in it is your weather patterns, because if you have stable weather and you've got a fairly strong south wind, and maybe you've got some type of a front coming in, those are the conditions that get bass more aggressive that will hit those larger baits. But if you've got conditions where you don't have much wind, it's bright, you're not going to get the bites on there, and you might be better off to go with the smaller one. So you have a lot of different factors coming together in order to decide what that determination is. It's a combination of water temperature, water depth, personality, mood of the fish, fishing pressure. A lot of that stuff just comes together at once with that. Real quick, I'll answer. Bill had a question on here about the crankbaits to reach 3 to 15 feet. The whole key on that is, it's a combination of line size and what you want that bait to do, how hard and how quick you want it to get down. But again, Strike King has a great series of crankbaits that covers all those depths. They got a little bit of everything for that. Megabass has got the deep 300, the Deep X 300, Deep X 200, Deep 6. A lot of different companies have crankbaits that will cover those ranges. Big deal on crankbaits, Bill, is you always want to be knocking that bottom. The only time that you don't want to be knocking that bottom is if you're fishing for smallmouth. And let me address that real quick. We have a couple quick questions on the smallmouth. Guys, the key to catching big smallmouth on a crankbait is, number one, look for your clearest water. Clear water is a big deal on there. Number two, go with some type of a perch pattern crankbait. A perch pattern crankbait will catch more big smallmouth in clear water than anything. And number three is don't hit the bottom on it. A lot of times for whatever reason, those big smallmouth will come up on a crankbait. So if I'm fishing, an area that's 12 or 15 feet deep, I want my crankbait to run 7 to 8 feet. I want those fish to come up on that crankbait, burn it fast, burn it hard, perch patterns. That's how you catch the big smallmouth on it.
Good deal. And I saw a couple comments over here, guys, saying they caught some big fish on the Bandit 200s, the little crankbaits like this. And I do want to address that really fast, in that you can catch some really big fish on these really small crankbaits, especially when that water temperature starts to dip below 65 degrees. When that water temperature is above 65 degrees, these smaller crankbaits will catch you some big fish, but in general, you're going to get a lot smaller bites on these small crankbaits in that warmer water temperature, because those bass are more aggressive, especially when they're dealing with shad or bluegill in the lake, like big gizzard shad, stuff like that. But as the water temperature drops in the 65 degree range and less, a lot of fish start feeding on crawfish, or they're just kind of opportunistic feeders because they want to feed up before the winter, and they'll just eat anything that comes by them. They're less picky. And that's why Randy talked about before with his retrieve up shallow, and as well as myself offshore. You can just go with more of a straight retrieve when the water temperature is getting that 65 degree or less range. And I catch a ton of big fish on a little crankbait like this. It's a Strike King Series 3 in a crawfish pattern, or like a little wiggle wart crankbait, whatever it is, especially on river systems. I got my tried and true all black Strike King Series 3 crappie crankbait. Don't talk about that too much, because that's a little secret right there that no one needs to know about. And a bunch of stuff like that. But that's kind of the stuff that really, when those bass are keyed in on shad, and there's a lot of shad around, crankbait size really matters. After the shad start to kind of spread out and get into the creeks, the bait size doesn't matter as much. Awesome. So we got a couple really good questions here, Randy. But before we do that, I want to let you guys know about a couple things. First, we got to let you know how to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky. We teased it at the beginning of the stream. I got to make sure you guys get on this giveaway for a free 12-pack case, 12 packages of Bridgeford beef jerky. All you have to do is let me know down in the comments below what your favorite fall crankbait is. Go in the comments of the video, not in the live chat. I know a bunch of you guys are in the live chat. You have to close out of the live chat, go down to the bottom, and leave a comment on the actual video. That way we can make it fair for everyone who watches the live stream and the podcast afterwards. But if you comment in the video with your favorite fall crankbait, just put the name and the brand, that's it. Then you get entered in to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky. Huge shout out to Bridgeford for sponsoring the live stream and the podcast. Our one and only sponsor, so make sure to support them if you like the content here, because we're keeping the lights on for the Fish the Moment live stream. So huge shout out to Bridgeford. One other thing that does help keep the lights on a little bit here, Randy, that if you guys want to help out as well, is to head over to our website, fishthemoment.com. And I got a bunch of stuff coming this next week, actually, Randy, to the website that I've been working on. Some really cool stuff that you guys are going to love. We'll talk about it in next week's live stream. But for now, one of the things that we have opened up recently are a few more lake breakdowns. So a lot of you guys know we do lake breakdowns where we give GPS waypoints on lakes all across the country. Randy has a ton of lakes that are out there for the summer as well as into the fall. On lakes all across the country, you get 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight into your fish finder. Here are all of our fall lakes. Great way to get a head start on where to fish in the fall. Gives you a lot of great areas and bait recommendations. And for those offshore anglers out there, I know I don't have as many map breakdowns as Randy, but I do have a few summer breakdowns I've added. But I also have a few limited time only personal lake breakdowns offshore. So if you guys have any tournaments coming up or something, I have a handful of personal lake breakdowns I'm going to be doing. I think there's like 3 or 4 available now. So definitely go pick one of these up if you need help finding some offshore areas this fall. I can look at any lake across the country as long as you have a contour line map for the lake. It needs to have a Navionics or Lake Master or some type of map. I can find the map regardless, but I just need to have some sort of contour map to kind of get a sense of where to go. So definitely check out these offshore lake breakdowns, personal lake breakdowns. And again, limited time only. I'm probably only going to do them for like a week or two, and then we're getting back to a bunch of other stuff. So had a little bit extra time, so I wanted to help you guys out because I know you guys are always asking for those. So anyways, there we go. Let's jump into a few more questions. So one question I see here from Jesse is a great question. Randy, Johnny, when do you decide to use a crankbait with or without rattles, or balsa over plastic? That is a great question. And Randy, I'll let you start with that because you're much more in tune with the bait modifications than I am for sure. But when do you go with rattles versus not rattles first?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll answer that real quick as far as the rattles versus non-rattles. I do not like any rattles in a crankbait. The only time I like rattles is in a rattle trap or lipless crankbait. So I want all my crankbaits silent. I think that you get more bites with the silent crankbait. I just think that it's a lot more natural. I think the vibration that a crankbait puts off and the amount of water that it pushes is plenty. So I find out that I get way more bites with a silent crankbait. I've never been in a situation where anybody has outfished me with a crankbait that's got rattles in it. I think that the more fishing pressure that you have in an area, the more bass shy away from rattles. So I'm a big proponent of a non-rattling crankbait. And I know a lot of them out there, some of your favorite crankbaits, you can't get them without rattles. I've even gone to the extent of, drilling a hole and, putting some super glue in there to lock the rattles together or take them out. So I find that I just get a lot more bites with a rattleless crankbait. As far as the balsa versus plastic, I used to think that there's a common myth in bass fishing. There's a bunch of myths in bass fishing, but there's a common myth amongst balsa versus crankbait that, you need to throw balsa crankbait around wood because it's going to deflect off the object and it's going to float up quicker. That is irrelevant to me because I don't need the bait to float up quick if it gets hung up. If it gets hung up, I'll go over and get it off. To me, the difference in balsa versus a plastic, and the only time that I use balsa is I use some homemade ones, some homemade balsa square bills. Is balsa gives off a different vibration. It pushes water a little bit different. You've got some different color variations, and basically it has a different wobble. And when I'm talking about plastic versus balsa, I'm not concerned about any aspect other than the size of the bait and the wobble of the bait. That's the only two things, and how the bait swings. Sometimes the balsa crankbait will tend to swing a little bit more, has a little bit more side-to-side action than the plastic one does. But overall, I've sort of transcended using balsa. I use it occasionally around cypress knees, lay downs occasionally. But I found out that I catch just as many in the gnarliest cover that there is with plastic as I do balsa.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better. I have nothing else to add there. That was perfect, Randy. Good stuff there. A couple other questions. One from Buell Bassing. Can you still target bluegill eaters in the early fall, or is it all about gizzard shad for big bass? You can definitely target fish that are feeding on bluegill for sure. they are a lot fewer and far between than the bass that are focused on those gizzard shad, because the gizzard shad start moving, or any type of shad will start moving from the main lake back into the creeks. So all those bass that were feeding on the bluegill in the summertime are usually positioned in the creeks. So if I pull up kind of a map here, just to give you an idea, those bluegill feeders are going to be back in the creek arms where those spawning bluegill are. But the shad start making their way in there. So there's a little window, basically, when the shad haven't made it all the way back into the back of the creeks. They're still kind of on the mouth of the creek, where there's still a concentration of bass up shallow that are feeding heavily on bluegill. Usually that's like going to be when the water temperatures are still in the high 80s, or low 80s, high 70s. But as the shad start making their way all the way back into the creeks, the bluegill focused bite starts to kind of go away, with the exception of actually having some bass that will stay out here on the main lake, and they'll actually feed on bluegill that are in brush piles offshore. It's a very specific pattern, but the brush piles offshore will hold bluegill, post-spawn bluegill, in the fall time. It's a great way to catch some really big fish, but there are very few of those fish out there. Like, you might do it all day and get like 1 or 2 bites, but you'll get some big bites. It's almost like less productive than throwing a big swim bait all day. It's very sketchy, but I've done it before. But yeah, really the bass stop feeding heavily on bluegill, I find, in that, like, when the water temperature hits like 70 degrees and below, they focus more towards crawfish and gizzard shad, threadfin shad, stuff like that. It's completely opposite if you're up north on the northern lakes. The perch and bluegill are the main forage up there in the fall for those bass, and they'll kind of suspend on them. But that's a whole different topic that we can't really get into, because there's like 4 people watching this live stream from up north, and it's like a whole thing. So can't get into that, unfortunately. But we do have a Natural Lake seminar on fishmoment.com if you want to check that out, where we talk exactly about how that works, how the movement of the perch in the fall and all that stuff. So check that out. One more question. Great question for Randy right here. I'm going to get your opinion on this, Randy, first, because I know we used the live scope in the fall last year on Grand Lake. I know you remember the day when I was catching him on the live scope. Question is the live scope a big player in the fall? Do you have an answer to that question, Randy?
Well, absolutely it is. I mean, the live scope is a big player any time of the year, especially in the fall. If those fish are suspended out there, a lot of times those fish will suspend very different at various depths, depending upon how deep the lake you're fishing, how deep the water clarity is. And it's if you choose to fish like that, it definitely has a huge impact on it. I mean, without a doubt. And for shallow water too. I mean, it's just the more these guys are getting really good and dialed into that forward-facing sonar, they're using it very efficiently in shallow water too.
For sure. It's crazy. I'm going to do a video with John Sukup, who owns the Bass Tank and has been fishing the National Professional Fishing League, won 2 tournaments this year over there, and he's using it to flip shallow laydowns, using the live scope to flip in like 3 foot of water. So, Randy, I'm sure you'll be interested to see that video, but we're going to make a video with him about that, because that'll be interesting. But what I find, guys, is that the live scope is actually the most effective when those bass are suspended, which really happens from like September through the rest of the year. There's a ton of suspended bass on shad, baitfish, stuff like that offshore. And honestly, I feel like for me offshore, I can literally catch 3 times as many fish in the fall with a live scope versus without a live scope on most lakes across the country, just because the bass suspend so much. The live scope is not as helpful for me in the, pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn throughout most of the summer. But as you get into that late summer through the pre-spawn again, the live scope is absolutely deadly. And I'll make more videos about this, because we did a video with Randy that actually it didn't make the chopping block because of other stuff that was going on. But basically we were out here on Grand Lake, and I was out here fishing these long tapering points that were in like 50 foot of water. And normally on Grand, you don't catch fish in like 30 to 50 foot of water, like really ever. But I was catching them on an Alabama rig using the live scope, which is like the unholy trinity of stuff for Randy. Offshore fishing, Alabama rig plus live scope, that is not your style of fishing, Randy. But I caught some really big ones fishing really deep just basically chasing fish around the middle of Grand Lake on those long points with the live scope and the Alabama rig, and it's crazy how effective it is. It almost makes the Alabama rig good again in the fall. That was when it was like really good. Just remember the Alabama rig when Paul Elias won on Gunnersville. It was like dominating everything. Well, if you combine the live scope plus the Alabama rig, it's just as good as it used to be in like 2010 or 12 whenever it was launched. But yeah, that's a pretty good deal there. Any comments on that, Randy? You're pretty quiet over there. I feel like you're not too happy about that last one.
I think, well, I got to be honest with you. I'm really irritated, Johnny, about what I read on Jay Kumar's Bass Blaster this afternoon. There was, and nothing against David Mullins, because he's a great guy. I like David a lot. But, man, have you guys seen his rig? He's got 3 Garmin, 12-inch Garmins up front, 3 12-inch Garmins on the console, and he's got 2 forward-facing sonar or transducers on there. He's got a live scope transducer and he's got a Garmin on there. Any guesses on how much that cost on there?
I don't even know how he does that.
That has got to be, that's over 20 grand in electronics.
Gosh. Wait, I'm trying to find this.
I may have to do a video and go on rant on that one. It's just unbelievable.
That is what. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm pulling this up.
Even Johnny's shocked by it. You can imagine my reaction.
God. Okay. I'm pulling this up. This looks ridiculous. Okay.
Is that not ridiculous?
This is actually ridiculous. I mean, you know me, Randy. I like having the equipment, but I'm not like... I still keep my setup as... I mean, I'm running the 9-inch Humminbird Helix unit. I'm not running the craziest setup in the world. I try to keep it as budget as I can. This is about as anti-budget friendly as possible. So we got 3 giant screens up here. This is wild. 3 giant screens up here. You got 1, 2, 3.
He said he's going to stay with it until something new comes out. Like he's ready to even upgrade beyond that.
So I guess the thought process I'm thinking is that he can use live scope forward facing, and then he can use perspective mode sideways. So it's kind of like you get Mega 360, but then he also has Mega 360. But where's his Mega 360? He has to have another unit on here, right? Oh,
I've lost track. He's got 3 or 4 units on it.
Oh, this is a different boat. This is a different rig. This one has 2 live scope transducers and a...
That's John Cruz's boat, I think, isn't it?
Okay, so he has... Okay, no, so he has active target from Lowrance, a Garmin, and he has... Wow. I can't... Those things must interfere with each other. Oh my gosh, okay. Well, I also don't know how he doesn't hit that thing off with his trolling motor. I mean, it worked for me because I never fish up shallow, but I feel like that would just get knocked off all the time from going through the shallow water.
You'd have to hire a security guard to watch your rig at night because, I mean, he has so much stuff on there.
Well, seriously, people could just take... I mean, those transducers are not cheap, and he has his black box right there. People could just come in, unscrew it, and there's a $1,500 live scope unit. Not telling anyone to do that, but I'm just saying, yeah, you need to literally hire a security guard. That's crazy. I mean, that's overkill. I'm going to call it there. I love having all my technology, but, I mean... That's a little bit overkill.
Hey, the ultimate is if Johnny Schultz would come out with a YouTube video and say, "This is ridiculous. We've gone too far now. We got to dial it back." So
yeah, I think that it's that's a little bit too much, honestly, for me. I still like my 9-inch units. I mean, my setup is not super expensive, guys. I mean, I have live scope and Mega 360, so just base, it's going to be expensive. But the fish finders I'm running are not that expensive with them. And actually, I'm redoing my setup, Randy, pretty soon here to even get less expensive. So you guys will probably like that. So that's something I'm doing just to kind of show you guys you don't need all these graphs to find fish offshore. But yeah, that's a little bit excessive. We went off on a big tangent, but I had to. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's been irritating me all afternoon. I had to get that off my chest.
Yeah, I feel like there's a comment here from Skynet. He says the radiation must be throwing into the lake is going to give all the fish cancer. I'm serious. That's too much. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. But anyways, well, I guess I don't know. Maybe that's what people want to do. Anyways, okay, so let's keep rolling on the mistakes here. So next mistake that we see a lot of anglers make is using the wrong casting angle in the fall. So casting angle is super important up shallow, but it's also very important offshore. So let's kind of get into the casting angle here, Randy, and I'll let you kind of start out with that.
Well, casting angle for shallow water cranking in the fall, I think it's the most number one. It's the most important element to maximizing the amount of bites that you're going to get on a piece of cover or an area by far. And I see, all these guys that I take out on lessons, the biggest mistake that I see they make and the biggest comment they give me is they simply, when I approach a piece of cover and I go around it 2 or 3 times, they just can't believe that because they've never taken into consideration that you have to generate strikes from different angles. So the thing that you have to realize is when you're fall cranking shallow water, the angle that you fish the bank or fish the cover at is dependent upon a couple of different things. It depends on the water depth. It depends on the angle and the slope of the bank that you're on, and it depends on the type of cover you're fishing. If you're fishing, say, some type of a rocky or gravelly bank, which a lot of cranking goes on, just cranking banks, first thing you have to do is consider the angle of that bank. Most of the time, you're going to be wanting to hit that 2 to 4 foot zone. So you need to position your boat at the angle where your bait is in that 2 to 4 foot zone the maximum amount of time. That could be, if the bank is flat, that could be where you're casting at a 45-degree angle. If it's really flat, it could be casting straight into the bank. If it's a steep bank, it could be paralleling it. If it's a 45-degree angle bank, you could be, maybe 6 or 7 feet off of it. But you want to put your boat in the position so you can make the cast to be in that strike zone the whole time. And I'll use an example yesterday. What happened at Table Rock with the guy I was fishing with. I told him that the bank was sloping off pretty quick, and I kept the boat out a little bit so we could both fish. And I said, by doing this, by approaching the bank at this angle and the angle of the cast that we're making on this bank, we're only catching 50% of the bass that's on this bank because our bait is only in the strike zone 25% of the time at this angle. Now, if I was to get tied in and parallel the bank, you couldn't fish out of the back of the boat, but my bait would be in the strike zone 100% of the time. So approach the casting angle to maximize the amount of time that your bait is in that key area. The other aspect of shallow water cranking is dealing with targets that are off the bank a little bit. This is usually on some type of a shallow flat back in the middle of the cove, whatever like that. And if you're fishing any type of cover that's off the bank, it doesn't matter if it's rock or if it's wood or whatever, pilings, dock pilings, or whatever, if you approach that at one angle, you're again going to catch 25% of the bass that's on there. A lot of times you have to make multiple angles, multiple different passes until you key in on that right angle that the bass is setting up on, because a lot of times you don't know what's under the water. You don't know how that bass is positioned based upon any type of current underneath the water, underwater cover that they have, shade, bottom composition. There's a lot of different stuff. So when you're dealing with isolated cover off the bank, make multiple casts from a lot of different angles. And when you're on a straight stretch of bank, try to position your boat wherever that may be to get your bait in that ideal depth zone as much as you can.
Good deal. Yeah, that's great tip there, Andy. On the offshore side, it's a little bit different, but I guess similar in some ways. The big thing that I'm thinking about, guys, when I'm crankbait fishing in the fall, is that unlike in the summer, when I'm really trying to crank deep water, so like, for example, one of my good deep crankbait spots on Grand from earlier this year, catching them over here. Where was it? It was right here. I caught a couple fish over here one day, and I'm cranking the tip of this point that drops into this creek channel, and it's like 12 to 15 feet of water on top dropping in the creek channel. And a lot of these fish will set up in 12 to 15 foot, maybe even 20 feet of water, and you can catch them cranking a little bit deeper. But in the fall, what happens is that as those water temperatures start to drop, a lot of those shad will push up shallower on top of these points, on top of these flatter areas. And instead of keeping your boat way out in the middle of the creek channel, putting your boat way out here and casting up into shallower water, working it back deeper, you really want to actually position your boat basically on the drop-off. Because a lot of your fish are not going to come on a crankbait when they're on the lip of the drop-off. They're actually going to come up on top of the flats, on top of the shallower areas offshore. And the creek channel might be close by, but the fish will be positioned in 5 to 8 feet of water. A spot that was very typical of this was a spot from a video that we did last year, Randy, where there was a point. It's a really sharp, obvious point that sticks out here. But the fish were positioned in like 7, 8 feet of water on this point, really shallow. And there was bait fish and stuff all over the place. And you could catch fish on an Alabama rig and a jerkbait and stuff off the point. But for those crankbait fish specifically, they were up here in 6, 7, 8 foot of water. And I caught several good fish cranking. What this means is that, honestly, my bait selection is pretty limited when I'm fishing offshore crankbaits to baits that dive less than 12 feet of water. I don't need a bait that dives super deep. But I always want to position my boat so that my boat is like right on the drop, like right where the drop off is, so I can cast all the way up on top of the flat. And some of my best fish catches, like for example another spot that we caught him a while ago, is when my boat was sitting like here on this drop off, and I'm firing way up here, and I'm getting my bites up on top of this like basically flat spot where there's nothing going on. That's where my bites were coming, because that's where the shad had pushed up. So I crank a lot shallower up on top of the flats in the fall versus cranking out on the edge or the ledge where you will in the summertime. And that's one thing that screwed me up for years, because I was always trying to crank the edges of the drops and stuff in the fall, not focus on those flatter areas. And that's one of my go-to baits, honestly, in the fall. I got several of them, but one of them is like the old classic Strike King Series 5 or like a Megabass Deep X300. I like the Deep X300 now more because it's pretty much the same size as the Series 5, but I can cast it like 10 yards further. It's a little more expensive, but I can fire it so much farther, so I just go with the Deep X300 here from Megabass. And then another baits that I go to, I actually like this Deep X200 by Megabass too, just because it casts well again. I've kind of got a little Megabass crankbait kick going on, but then I also keep it basic with the Strike King crankbaits as well. I kind of like them both. It's kind of hard to decide which ones to go for, Megabass or Strike King. I like the price of the Strike King. I like the castability of the Megabass, so I'm kind of like conflicted over here. Randy's got me like conflicted on which baits to throw, Megabass, striking. But anyways, and then I also throw the little medium diving crankbaits like a Striking Series 3 that dives 8-9 feet of water on like 10-pound tests. So that's kind of the deal I go with, guys. And again, cast up on top of the flats more than working it deeper. Now, one question I have, or one question we had here that I thought was interesting, or that I wanted to answer was, let me find it again here. I remember the question. I'm trying to find the guy who said it. Basically, the question was, or the comment was basically saying that it's the middle of August here. Water temperatures are 85 degrees in this guy's lake, and all the tournaments were being won halfway back in the creeks. So he's wondering, why are all these fish being caught halfway back in the creeks, even though the water temperatures are 85 plus degrees? Well, to explain that, let me pull up the map again, and Randy, you can kind of get into this as well. Just kind of answer this question really quick. Basically, what's happening is that the bass are probably bluegill feeders. This is Table Rock Lake here. A lot of fish in the summertime on Table Rock will set up on the main lake. They'll be on the main river channel out here suspended in timber, stuff like that. But there's a certain percentage of the bass that don't move out to the main lake, and they actually stay back in the backs of the creeks feeding on spawning bluegill. The bluegill on a lot of lakes will spawn halfway back in these creeks all summer long. Every time there's a full moon and a new moon, there's a new bluegill spawn. So a lot of these flat, shallow pockets are going to hold big bass. Now, I don't like fishing this way, but that is the deal here, is the water temperature, even if it's 85 here and 85 on the lake, it doesn't matter. The reason those big bass are back here is because they're feeding on the bluegill. And a lot of the biggest bass of the year will stay in these creeks in the summertime. The problem, though, is that to catch these fish, you have to cover a ton of water, and it's basically just a gamble. A lot of Forest Wood Cups over the years in Lake Washita and Arkansas have been won on this pattern, fishing these little short creeks. But I know Jacob Wheeler actually was leading after 2 days of the tournament, Randy, fishing the shallow pockets with topwaters, buzzbaits, whopper poppers, stuff like that. And the last day of the tournament, he caught one fish for 1 pound. So he had 18 pounds and 17 pounds the first 2 days, then basically blanked the last day. So it's a hit or miss pattern, but in a one-day tournament, it can be a great pattern. Would you kind of like to expand on that a little bit, Randy?
Yeah, it's a combination that's the primary thing what Johnny's talking about. Also, it depends on the cover in that particular area. That sometimes that can just be the part of the creek where the best cover's at. It could have whatever cover's available on the lake could be there. Thing you got to remember is bass are where you find them at. A lot of times they don't read books, they're just wherever they are. But the bluegill deal is the number one. I can give you guys a prime example. I was down at Table Rock about 3 or 4 days ago, had a trip down there, and the guy that I was fishing with, he had to go use the bathroom. So I pulled up on the bank, and we were about halfway back in the creek like you're talking about there. The water at Table Rock is there's maybe a foot of water in the bushes, real clear. Water's just up a little bit. It's not high enough to flip, but there's just maybe 12 inches of water in the bushes. So I pull up to the bank there, and he gets out to the bank to go and use the bathroom. And I look over next to me, and there's a bush there right on the bank, halfway back in the creek. And there's 2 3 to 4 pound bass in 12 inches of water underneath that little bush. So I started, after he got back in the boat, we started working down the bank there. And just like Johnny said, every 10 feet, there was a bluegill bed, a bluegill or a black perch. A lot of different type of perch bedding through there. Those bass were up there in 12, 15 inches of water, just hunting those bluegills. And that's what brought them up in that real hot, shallow water in that part of the creek.
For sure. And that pattern is a lot more volatile than fishing offshore in the summer, but also it's a lot easier. It's like just tying a whopper plopper and just burn the bank, shallow pockets, and you might get lucky, kind of that sort of deal. Versus this time of year offshore, you have to deal with the suspended bass, catching them on a flutter spoon, swim bait, hair jig. It's a lot trickier. So a lot of guys just don't want to take the time to go do that or mess with it, so they just go fish shallow. And it's a great way if you want to just kind of gamble to win a tournament. If you can get the 5 bites in the boat, you might catch 18 or 19 pounds, and you're probably going to win that tournament even over anyone fishing offshore. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Yep, no doubt. It's high risk, high reward, and it's an option if you don't like fishing deep, but it's not near as consistent as fishing out off the bank.
For sure. And that was a question from Brian. Just saw that here. So, good deal. Awesome. So, next comment mistake. Oh, we're already running. We were running. So, we're going to do 4 mistakes here, Randy. One of them is, one I'll just kind of throw out there is that you're not fishing shallow enough, guys. In general, what I find when guys are fishing crankbaits, both offshore and up shallow, in the fall, is that you're not fishing shallow enough. Whether it's throwing your crankbaits up shallow, up in 2 foot of water, whether it's a lipless crankbait or a square bill crankbait, whatever it is, or if you're fishing offshore, throw those crankbaits shallower than you expect. Offshore, fish them in 4 to 12 foot of water, up shallow, grind the bills off of them, throw them super duper shallow, because that's where a lot of those big fish are in the fall, especially chasing those shad. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Yeah, in shallow water, a lot of it depends on the water clarity. If you're fishing dirty water, water visibility under 12 inches, you can fish extremely shallow. A lot of people think, if you're fishing 3 to 4 foot deep in dirty water, you're fishing way too deep. So don't let any shallow water scare you. If you got 12 inches of water, muddy water, you definitely need to at least see if those bass are there, because they live in a lot shallower water than what most people think they do.
For sure, and that's definitely a fall thing. That's not like a year-round thing. That's just a fall thing.
Yeah.
Good deal. Okay, last mistake is equipment. So the last mistake that a lot of anglers make when fishing crankbaits, not just in the fall, but just all the time, is equipment. So I want to walk through the equipment that I use, guys, because it's a little bit polarizing, because I use different equipment probably than what Randy does, but I'm just going to pull up Tackle Warehouse here and show you guys my setup for my deep diving crankbaits. So the rod that I've been experimenting with recently, guys, is this Denali Covert series. I actually talked about in a video, and I've thrown it several times. I really like it. A lot of the rods I use this Abu Garcia Veritas crankbait rod for years, and they're just like, I've thrown them forever and ever, and I want to try something different. So this is the only new crankbait rod that actually is available for sale that I own. All the other ones are discontinued. So it was the Denali Covert Light series crankbait rod, 7'6" medium heavy. This rod works great for a lot of your heavier crankbaits like a Megabass Deep X 300, like the 3-inch crankbaits, Striking Series 5, all the way up to a bigger crankbait like a Striking 6XD. So this is a great rod. Been throwing it really well. Works really well. I'm sure the Abu Garcia Veritas rod could also work really well. Their current model. I don't like the way that the grips are. I have one of them, and the grips get all like distorted and gross because they're white, so I didn't really like that. So I've tried this rod, and it works really, really well. But the big thing that I do with my crankbaits is I'm always going to throw them on a 5:4-to-1 gear ratio reel in every season of the year except for in the fall. The only time I throw my deep diving crankbaits on a reel that's not a 5:4-to-1 is in the fall. So the reel that I will use in the fall with my deep diving crankbaits is the Abu Garcia Black Max. You guys know I love my cheap fishing reels. The Black Max is the way to go. 6:4-to-1 gear ratio reel. I absolutely love it. For me, that's a fast reel. Or a decent speed reel. When I was growing up, a 7-to-1 gear ratio reel was fast. So I see this Black Max as a pretty fast reel for cranking. So I'll throw a 6:4-to-1 gear ratio Black Max for my crankbait fishing in the fall because I really want to get that fast stop and go retrieve where I reel it quickly and then stop it, reel it quickly and then stop it. And so you need a little bit faster reel to get those quick accelerations out of the bait. If I was doing anything as fishing any other season of the year, I would probably be throwing, I throw a Black Max winch reel, but they don't have those in Tackle Warehouse, so this is the other one you can get. The Abu Garcia winch, it's a 5:4-to-1 gear ratio reel. You can also find other 5:4-to-1 gear ratio reels. I just use the Abu Garcia Black Max winch that I buy at Walmart for $50, but it's a 5:4-to-1 gear ratio reel. That's my normal crankbait reel in the majority of the year, other than the fall. Now the polarizing part, Randy, is my line. When I throw my deep diving crankbaits, I like to go for some monofilament line. So it doesn't really matter to me exactly which fluorocarbon. I just pulled up Sunline here. Fluorocarbon monofilament. Actually, let me just go to Stren Original. This is even better. You can buy this at Walmart. So Stren Original monofilament clear line. I throw with my crankbaits 10 or 12 pound monofilament line all the time, always. Now you guys are probably like, what? Why are you using monofilament? Monofilament stretches as all these things. No one likes monofilament line. Well, there's two reasons. One, I recently tested how deep a crankbait will dive on monofilament line versus fluorocarbon line. And the reason I tested this is because I was listening to a podcast with David Fritz on it. David Fritz, for those who don't know, is one of the best crankbait fishermen of all time, especially deep diving crankbait fishermen. He is just a guru of deep diving crankbaits. He throws all of his crankbaits on monofilament line, or he at least used to. I've heard something about him using braid now, which I don't really know I don't know about that one, but monofilament is what he threw for years and years. And the reason is because when he tested it against fluorocarbon, he only got a half of a foot more depth out of his crankbaits with fluorocarbon versus monofilament. And I thought this was interesting, so I tested it, and it's 100% true. The deeper the crankbait goes, maybe the more effect fluorocarbon will have. So like on a 6XD striking crankbait, I can get an extra foot out of that crankbait, but that's it. And honestly, I'm always picking crankbaits that dive 2 to 3 feet deeper than the depth I want to fish anyways. So if I was going to throw the Striking Series 5 that dives 12 feet deep, I'm only going to throw it in like 9 foot of water maximum. I'm not going to try to get this bait down to 12 foot of water. If I wanted to get to 12 foot of water, I'll just go to a bigger crankbait, like a Striking 5XD. A little bit deeper, a little bit bigger. So the line size to me doesn't matter that much because I still have a 2 to 3 foot wiggle room to work with. And I don't think that the depth advantage of fluorocarbon over monofilament is a big deal. Yeah, you get a foot extra depth out of your crankbait with fluorocarbon, yes, but for me, I'm already picking crankbaits to dive deeper than I need to, so it doesn't matter. The reason that monofilament in my mind is better, though, is it has lots of stretch. So monofilament stretches. And the reason that that's important for me is because when a fish bites a crankbait, you have little tiny treble hooks on there. And if you have line that has less stretch, when those fish pull on your rod, they're going to potentially pull these light wire hooks free. They're not going to stay in the fish's mouth. Now, this is very particular to the types of hooks I throw. So this is another element to deep diving crankbait fishing. My whole cranking system is a literal system. So what I use when I'm using my crankbaits are Gamakatsu EWG just regular hooks. I just use these Gamakatsu EWG trebles. They're pretty light wire. They're not stiff. They're not 2x strong or short shank or anything like that. It's just a regular treble hook. The reason I go with this one is because I've just had a lot of success with it. But if you throw this hook with fluorocarbon line and a stiff rod, you will lose tons of fish. But if you pair this hook, this light hook, with monofilament line that has very little stretch, monofilament line has a lot of stretch, so you have a stretchy line, plus you pair it with a, Denali rod, pair it with a rod that has a lot of bend to it, like this Denali crankbait rod. It's a crankbait specific rod that has a lot of bend. You get the cushion of a bendy, whippy rod with the covert light, plus the benefits of the stretch from the monofilament. It allows that hook to stay in the fish's mouth better. It gives some kind of give to those fish, and I barely ever lose fish on deep diving crankbaits when I have nice new hooks on the bait. I'm throwing my monofilament line, and I'm throwing a nice whippy crankbait rod. It's worked super well for me. I know some guys really won't like that, but for me that really works. Now the other option is to go with fluorocarbon line, and you maybe can go with some bigger hooks. So for example, instead of going for the hooks I just showed you there, maybe you go for the thicker, let me try to find I don't know where the thicker hooks are. Here we go. These Gamakatsu EWG treble short shank 2X. These are very thick treble hooks, and they're shorter shanked. These hooks, you basically need to almost set the hook on the fish really hard to penetrate this hook into the fish's mouth. So you need less give. So you can actually use a little bit stiffer rod. You can use fluorocarbon line to get that hook in the fish's mouth, and it's no problem. But when you're dealing with monofilament line, if you use this hook with monofilament line, you're going to lose tons of fish. So what I think happens is the guys will use these short shank 2x strong hooks with monofilament and lose a bunch of fish and say this is not the right setup. The problem though is then some guys will use these type of hooks, these EWG trebles, with their fluorocarbon, and they're like, these hooks suck. I'm losing a bunch of fish because you're cranking with fluorocarbon on these hooks. You need to pair the hook with the proper line. So these lighter wire hooks, throw it with monofilament, or if you don't like that style, pick up fluorocarbon and go to the thicker 2x strong hooks. Either way will work. KVD goes with the thicker 2x strong hooks and the fluorocarbon. I like my lighter hooks with monofilament. It's just personal preference. It's just the way that we fish. But that is how I do it, Randy, and that's kind of my spiel on crankbaits for deep diving crankbaits. What do you think?
Well, my system for shallow water is a little different. The rod that I use most all the time is that Megabass launcher, which you can probably pull it up on Tackle Warehouse there. It's a 7-foot, 11-inch rod. It's got a soft tip on it. I would consider it medium soft, so it's a pretty flexy tip. But I like the length of the rod. It's 7 feet, 11 inches long. It allows me to make a super long cast. It allows me to take up a lot of slack on the hook set. It allows me to control the fish very well, and the soft tip on it is very forgiving. Now, I've experimented with mono and fluorocarbon both, and I can't tell a lot of difference. I mean, if I'm fishing a square bill crankbait fast and making short casts, I will use monofilament line. But the one thing that I sort of differ on Jonny a little bit is I tend to throw the fluorocarbon a little bit more simply because if I'm using a small crankbait, I need the maximum depth a lot of times if I'm cranking down a bank. And for example, I can go with 10-pound test fluorocarbon line, and it's sort of the same diameter as 6-pound test monofilament line. So if I try to go to the same diameter to get the bait down, I would sacrifice a lot of line power in doing that, and that's why I go with the fluorocarbon a little bit more for most situations there. I use a 7-to-1 retrieve reel for everything, simply because I just don't want to buy another one. I sort of just vary my retrieve on it. Like I said, my line, I'm back and forth between mono and fluorocarbon. The hooks that I use on my system, I've experimented with a ton of them, and I like that Gamakatsu G Finesse treble hook. I found the one that Aaron Martin's designed. It's got the O'Shaughnessy bend in it. It's the nano-coated hook. It's just like Johnny was talking. You've got a 2X size on it and a regular one, and there's something about that I don't lose many fish on that. But I know we're running a little long here, so I won't get into it too long. But one of the things I will say about cranking, guys, is a lot of the time you can have your system just right, and you can do everything just perfect. But if those fish are not eating the bait right, you're still going to lose them. And if they're eating the bait good, you're going to get them in the boat regardless what uh, equipment you're using. So what you're trying to do by going to the right line, the right rod, the right hook, is you're trying to get those short strikers in the boat. That's what you're after. You're trying to maximize getting as many of those short striker fish in the boat as you can.
Good deal. I completely agree. Randy, one of the reasons I don't talk about equipment as much as other guys is because I don't feel like I am as specific with my equipment as the guys want me to be, and they always trash me and assume that I don't know what I'm talking about with equipment. Not to be mean here, but like with one guy in the comments was like, if you have a softer rod, it will take some of the blow. Better rods you go with, you can go with straight fluoro. I'm using the perfect crankbait rod, guys. I promise you, it is a literal crankbait rod that bends in half. It's like literally a buggy whip of a rod. It's literally designed for a crankbait rod. I'm using the right rod. I've had that comment in like my last crankbait video too. They're like, you're using the wrong rod, you're using a medium heavy rod. No, I'm using a medium heavy moderate crankbait rod. It's basically like the same as a old composite glass rod with the flex of it. So you can go with a glass rod if you want. Those things are super expensive. Or you can go with a really nice bendy rod, go with monofilament. It works. I don't know why people are like complaining about it too, because also if you can use monofilament, it saves you money, because monofilament costs, you can buy 3 spools of monofilament for 1 spool of fluorocarbon. So don't worry, guys. The setup I use, it works for me. It catches fish. So don't be trashing me in the comments about this going forward, because it works for me. I catch a bunch of fish. You can watch my videos. And this is a system I've worked on. It saves me money. It saves me fish losses. I catch plenty of fish. So that's just what I do. But no, I'm using the right stuff as far as the rods. Like, they're literal crankbait rods designed for crankbait fishing. They're not like a flipping stick. So just want to call it out, because a lot of people think I'm using flipping sticks for cranking, and they think that apparently they think I don't know what I'm doing and I'm a novice, but whatever. That's one of my pet peeves there. But anyways, off my soapbox there, pulling a Randy rant right there, mini Randy rant. Anyway, so that was it, guys. Randy, anything else on the crankbait stuff?
No, like I said, guys, it's just if I could leave you guys with a couple different pieces of advice on shallow cranking, it's really pay attention to your casting angles and your boat positioning, and mix and match your colors up a lot of times, because the colors that you find that are going to be best, it changes throughout the day. Different sky conditions, different light intensity levels, different water clarities you run into will demand a different color change. So switch up colors a lot, switch up your casting angles, switch up your retrieve ratios until you hit on the right combination.
For sure. Completely agree with that. Hopefully this seminar, this live stream was helpful in kind of explaining some fall fishing mistakes with crankbaits. Again, if you want to get entered in to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky, 12 packages of Bridgeford beef jerky, go in the comments after this video is posted on YouTube or right now and let us know what your favorite fall crankbait is. If you put that in the comments of the video, we're going to choose one winner, and next week we'll announce the winner for a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky, 12 packages. So shout out to Bridgeford for being our title sponsor. Check out Bridgeford beef jerky. You can get it, I think, at Academy Sports, Walmart's, other local tackle shops, outdoor shops, stuff like that. A lot of places carry Bridgeford beef jerky. Again, also too, if you guys are interested in checking out some stuff on our website to help continue to support our content, head to our website, fishmoment.com. Go to our lake breakdowns page. You can check out lake breakdowns of lakes all across the country. Randy has a bunch of fall breakdowns out. We have 40 GPS waypoints to spots on the most popular lakes across the country that you can download straight to your fish finder. We give you detailed instructions about how to do this, area descriptions of the areas as well, baits to throw, lake breakdown, with a summary of the lake, everything like that. And there are lakes all across the country you can check out here in the fall. And then also, I have opened up for a limited time only, like next 2 weeks, some offshore personal lake breakdowns. I don't have any fall breakdowns out right now, but I do plan on doing some. But I also wanted to open up some of these offshore personal lake breakdowns because I get a lot of requests for them. So if you want me to take a look at your lakes and give you offshore spots on your lakes, I'll give you 30 GPS waypoints of exactly where to go to find some fall bass. So check those out over on fishmoment.com. Very limited supply of those, and they're only going to be up for like 2 weeks, so get them before they're gone. They may already be gone by the time this live stream is posted, but hopefully there's still some there for you if you want them. So other than that, Randy, that's pretty much it. This week I'm heading out to a Lake Kerr Reservoir in Oklahoma, not Bugs Island, not the Bugs Island Kerr, but Kerr Reservoir, Kerr Lake in Oklahoma. Now I'm going to be doing shallow water only. Kerr is part of the Arkansas River. It's shallow, so you guys are going to see me try to catch 15 pounds in my Catch 15 challenge with only shallow water techniques. Should be interesting. I'm probably just going to turn the electronics off just to kind of make it more fun. I'm not even going to use electronics. I'm just going to go fish. So that should be fun. And yeah, that's kind of the plan. I have to channel some inner Randy, I think, with that, because last time I was trying to fish up shallow, it was during our episode 100 live stream. If you haven't checked it out, I was on the lake finding fish live, like in the moment, showing you how I find fish. And at the end of the stream, I told guys I was going to go fish a frog up shallow, and I went up to the bank, and within 2 minutes of hitting the bank and throwing a frog, it's like Randy employed an EMP jammer. He blocked the cell signal. I could not fish anywhere close to the bank, and I had to go back offshore. The chat dropped. Everything dropped. My screen was blurry. So I don't know what happened, Randy. You cursed me with the shallow water game, but I need you to lift the curse for 1 week so I can go catch him on Kerr.
Man, that is going to be I'll be super impressed. I think the Bass Open I fished down there were only like 2 or 3 bags over the whole course of the week, over 15 pounds out of Kerr. So that's going to be a monumental challenge down there, but I'm pretty confident you'll do it.
If I catch 15 pounds up shallow on Kerr in August, that's a new record for me. That would be pretty interesting. That would be cool.
Yeah, that'd be a good day up there.
Oh yeah. Awesome. Well, guys, again, thanks for checking out the stream. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday, same time, same place. Make sure to subscribe to the Fish Moment Live channel if you want to get notified of the next live stream, and also like this live stream to help us reach more viewers and help out the channel. So thanks again, guys. Have a good night.